My name is SK, and today I'm going to be leading you through the more advanced version of a flower's anatomy. I love knowing these things about my world because when I look at flowers, I think, wow, that's so pretty, or maybe it smells really interesting. But knowing more about the anatomy helps me engage with my environment a little bit more easily. I'm so excited to show you. Let's get started. To start, I have colored in the stem and leaf of a plant, and as we might know from plant parts videos, the stems and leaves come before flowers because they gather nutrition and sunlight prior to making a flower. Only some plants make flowers, but as a garden educator, I like to teach my students about this because most plants that we like to eat, especially ones that have a fruit or seed that we consume, requires this step of making a flower. To help us stay organized, I've colored in the leaf and the stem a green color, though plants often come in other colors that are not green. I've also added in an immature flower bud. This flower bud protects this flower as it matures and as the flower develops inside. But we're going to start by showing what parts a flower has after it has matured and burst. We're going to get started, but please feel free to pause the video at any time to catch up if you are following along. When looking at the outside of a flower, you're probably going to notice two main parts. Those two parts are the petals, and for right now I'm going to draw my petals almost like a tulip. And I can color those in a moment. And you'll also likely notice something called the sepals. The sepals are often the same color as the stem and the leaves, and that's the part that is protecting the flower while it's developing. And once that flower has bloomed, they oftentimes curl up underneath the plant. Next, we're going to draw some of the internal flower parts. Something to keep in mind is that not every flower that you're looking at will have all of these parts, but this is a good idea of which ones you might be looking at. So first, I'm going to draw what is referred to as the female parts of the flower. And so this, to me, looks a lot like a vase that you might actually put flowers in. This flower part is referred to as the pistil, P-I-S-T-I-L. And so this whole part right here is that pistil. The pistil has certain parts of it that are pretty easy to find. So this part up here is called the stigma. And that works like the sticky top of a straw. We also have something called the style. And I like to think that that's because flowers have style. We have something called the ovary, and that's this bigger bulbous part. And on my diagram, I've drawn it kind of large, but in real life, it's not always that big. This is the ovary. And inside the ovary are things called ovules. But for now, I just want you to know that ovary. I've colored in my diagram to make it a little easier to tell what we're looking at. Next, I'm going to talk about what is referred to as the male parts of the flower. If you're a person who suffers from seasonal allergies, this unfortunately is the part of the flower that is bothering you. So to the sides of this stigma and style and ovary system oftentimes are little sticks that have little bonbons attached to them. The ends of these bonbons are what creates something called pollen. So if you've ever heard of a pollinator, then you have heard of the thing that sticks to pollinators when they visit a flower. This pollen is also what is likely aggravating your allergies if you suffer from allergies. This male part of the plant is referred to as the stamen. And just like that pistil, it has specific parts to it. So up here, we've got this cool little bonbon thing, and that is called the anther. The staff that it is attached to is called the filament. And the very last thing that I want you to know about on this flower is that many flowers produce something called nectar that sits usually at the bottom of this flower. This nectar is the primary reason why pollinating animals, whether it's an insect or a bird or a mammal, that's the primary reason why they're visiting. But not all flowers are pollinated by an animal. You might have also heard of nectar because that is oftentimes what is made into honey, and if you are like me, you enjoy honey. So as a quick refresher, we have two major types of systems that are happening in a flower. We have the female part of the system, which is called the pistil, and that female part of the system has three parts to it. It's got a stigma, which works like a sticky straw for pollen to stick to. It has a style, which is this tube that the pollen will move down once a flower has been pollinated. And it also has an ovary, which has ovules inside of it, and that's what eventually becomes your fruit and seeds after they have been pollinated. Can you identify the pistil and stigma on this tulip? Now let's talk about the male part. That is called the stamen, and the stamen is where the pollen is produced. So the stamen has two parts. It's got this bonbon section up here, and that is called the anther, and the filament holds up the anther. Now I challenge you to find the stamen on this flower. When we discuss flower diversity, we can talk about a couple different types of flowers. We've got a plant that might have just female flowers on that plant and might need a pair that has the other gender of flowers on it. Some plants have a male flower and a female flower on the same plant but in different places. And some flowers have both genders of flower parts on the same flower. Now, this can make looking at a flower kind of confusing, but they have all of these same general parts if you take a look. I challenge you to safely go out into your environment and look for flowers that might have these parts. Today I drew something that looked like a tulip because tulips have very dramatic and easy to see flower parts. You can usually identify the female parts or the pistil of a flower and the male parts or the stamen of a flower, and it's very easy to see that. And usually if you gently knock against that flower, you'll even get some of its pollen onto your hands or your clothes. Thank you very much for joining me today and learning more about flower parts. If you wanted to think about the more basic version of this, you could just remember that a flower might have a pistil, or the female part of a plant, or it might have a stamen, or male part of a plant. Some flowers look really different. For example, cornflowers can look really dramatically different versus a tree's flowers, but it's really fun to go out and see what diversity you can find. I challenge you to safely explore your environment, and please remember, flowers are most enjoyable if they can grow where they're growing. Thank you. Take care.